We're always looking for ways to improve efficiency of our review processes as well as the assessment sort of cycles to reduce the number of cycles before ANDA approval. As part of that, what we're looking for is gaps and current challenges to improve the ANDA submission quality. My talk, and which I hear is from a number of talks later this afternoon, is really to help communicate where we're seeing common ANDA major deficiencies, so that way industry is more aware of these sort of aspects, and as well as where we need additional communication and enhanced communication, and as well inform you where those aspects can be, so we can get higher quality ANDA submissions, improve our efficiency in terms of ANDA assessment, and get more first and second cycle approvals. So I've broken my talk up into three main components. The first one is I'm going to give a sort of retrospective look at where we are with ANDAs that were submitted in fiscal year 2018 and 2023, so that way you get what aspects we are looking at in terms of those approval rates, what we have as major deficiencies, and then do a little bit more of a tranching analysis. This can be done because there's a lot of data there, but I'll give you a few examples in particular of like what we look like for major deficiencies based upon generic industry size, as well as the complexity of drug product. The next thing I'll go into as second part is to then dig in a little bit deeper and look specifically at major BE deficiencies, where we're seeing different aspects there that you guys can work on, we can provide additional clarity on with respect to the BE. As I mentioned, other talks this afternoon, we'll go into DMF, CMC, and other BE aspects. There's a lot of rich data here. And finally, I'm going to finish up by talking about a lot of these initiatives we've been talking about the last few days, really to enhance that communication, that clarity, and get to that sort of next step where we want to be. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but like I said, there's a lot of information available to us. The more we know, the more you guys will be able to utilize and leverage this. What I'm looking at here is ANDA submissions in fiscal year 2018 and 2022, and the number of cycles that were done until approval, and as well as the current status. You might ask, like, why we look at such things as so old as FY18. The reason there is we've now got 7 years of data. It's a more robust data set, so we can show you not only the first, second cycle, because all of them should have gone past that. We're going to look at third, fourth, fifth, and as well as the number of applications that are withdrawn. Then at FY22, we should have all those applications who have at least gone through the second cycle, so we can really look at that first and second cycle approval rates and better understand that. I think what we want to drive to, obviously, is first cycle approval, but there's still, we can see a lot of diversity within generic industry and areas we can improve communication. So I think right now, as a striving sort of desired goal, is we should always get towards second cycle approval. This means after your first CRL, that CRL should be clear. You should be able to address that CRL and get back to this next cycle and approval. Right now, we're getting at approximately 40% of ANDAs at second cycle approval. What we were looking for is you have this extra 60% of ANDAs that have to go either multiple cycles or get withdrawn in areas that we can potentially work on. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is the number of complex products we're getting per year. In FY18, we got about 14% of those ANDAs submitted for complex products. That's increased to 17% in FY22. And if I remember right, from FY24, we're up to over 20%. So we're seeing is the number of complex products being submitted to the agency is increasing and being proportional. So this is a good sort of aspect for those products in demand. So one thing that's always kind of asked is, well, if my generic industry has a lot of experience, theoretically our deficiencies should be different. We have a lot of understanding. And what we wanted to look at then is, what are the relative major deficiencies with respect to your industry size? A very large industry we've classified as an industry that has more than 100 ANDA approvals. We then have large companies, medium companies, and small companies typically have 1 or 2 ANDAs already approved and or not approved yet, but no more than 6 ANDAs. And if you look over here on the right-hand side from those pie graphs, what we really see is in terms of distribution of major deficiencies, there's not a really big difference between industries. So any types of information that we can develop should be broadly applicable to all of generic industry, no matter if you're a large industry or company or a very small company. Also, one of the things that really pops out, and I'll talk about through a couple other slides, is the major sort of issue we constantly see as major deficiency is in the manufacturing. That includes your site facilities. Site facilities remains one of the major deficiencies that we see for applications and something that we definitely need industry to work more proactively on. Other aspects there is within the quality, drug product, drug substance, and also then bioequivalence. Interesting here, I don't know if you know a statistical or aspect of that, but we also see that for complex products, in general, we're seeing a lot of very large industry going after that and very small companies going after these complex products. So the other aspect we want to look at is, well, what's a persistent deficiency? Do you mean what I showed you on the last slide is after the first cycle, what's the big sort of deficiencies we see? What is the thing that after a second, third, fourth cycle that it's still persistent as a major deficiency? And I think we'll show on this bar graph here, as you can see on the left-hand side, complete response 1, it's that general sort of distribution, BE, drug product, deficiencies overall, manufacturing. But as you go to second, third, fourth cycle, we're seeing is really improvement and a decrease in deficiencies in that BE, drug substance, drug product. But manufacturing site facilities continue to be a persistent sort of issue through multiple cycles. I think this goes back to understanding why that's there and being more proactive in addressing those earlier and making it more appropriate. The other thing I want to kind of respond to is, well, complex products can obviously be challenging. So what do we see in terms of deficiencies in that sort of space? And we will say is that, your first cycle, complex products typically have, because we have more complex BE and product sort of things, they do make a little bit smaller percentage of those major first deficiencies. However, the manufacturing is regardless. It doesn't matter if it's a complex product or non-complex product. We don't really see a difference in terms of the percentage of manufacturing major deficiencies, depending on the product complexity. So now I'm going to do like a bit more of a dive, because I've shown you the overall the manufacturing. When you hear from other groups talking about some of the quality issues and even other BE issues, but now what we're looking is just specifically at what are the major bioequivalence deficiencies that we see in that first cycle. And as you know, is what we're seeing a lot more is, and a lot more recommendations are these in vitro BE approaches. These are new approaches, characterization approaches. And so what we're seeing is in that area, there's still potentially a lot of unclarity or areas that we can provide a bit more information. And it's a sort of a growing area because the major BE deficiencies that we're generally seeing are in these new in vitro BE studies, in particular the in vitro release testing, in vitro permeation testing, and in vitro binding studies that are done. However, within that sort of scope, I do want to highlight the fact it's not necessarily the study design or everything else like that. It's what it is the method development, the discriminatory ability, all the additional information for the analytical components that go to help support the adequacy of those sort of studies that we're seeing that sort of aspect. The other second major sort of component we're seeing in major BE deficiencies is actually an insufficient validation data. This is typically with either those analytics for the PK or the in vitro sort of studies, in particular about sample matrix, stability, LLOQ, and chromatograph issues. And so this is another, in your method validation analyticals, another key component that we see a lot of sort of gaps and challenges that can be addressed. So as I mentioned before, I keep kind of building this and going narrower and narrower and narrower. If we looked at BE deficiencies, you can think of any types of route administration, dosage form, or like that we can do a deeper analysis on. What I've chosen here is I've done now a deeper analysis of the actual in vitro BE deficiencies that are major for a specific route of administration, topical dermatological products. The reason we chose this is because more of these products are being recommended as a characterization-based or in vitro-based BE approaches. And we've seen of ANDAs submitted from FY 2018 to 2023, the number of ANDAs submitted proposing and or doing these types of in vitro studies has been increasing. What we're also seeing is a lot of deficiencies with those in vitro characterization studies. So this aspect here looks at not only those characterization studies, but out of all the characterization studies or in vitro studies, what are the ones that are still having the most major issue and or the issues with major deficiencies? If you go down to the bottom sort of pie graphs or donut graphs down below, it shows you both the in vitro release testing and in vitro permeation testing. So for those applicants in the dermatological space that are doing an in vitro release testing, we're seeing is some, probably about 33% or getting an adequate within that sort of first cycle, but there's still a large percentage that are inadequate. But then if you go to the in vitro permeation testing, this one that's done through a skin or sort of other sort of aspect there that's not synthetic membrane like the IVRT, we're almost exclusively still in an inadequate state. There's a lot of gaps still there to be able to understand and to be able to develop and to get that out so we can get to more first cycle approvals or second cycle approvals with those applicants. So this kind of pulls me into that third point. Now that we have this understanding of where these knowledge gaps are, where these challenges remain, where we need enhanced communication, I really want to advocate again, we've got a lot of these sort of aspects that we can start to have these engagements. And industry should be able to use these aspects take it proactively, understand what your thing is, using these sort of resources, then to engage with FDA and or doing the research and background to make sure we're getting a high quality ANDA submission at that first cycle. So as the first and topmost, the GDUFA commitments provide you guys a lot of opportunities and resources to engage specifically about your ANDA application, both of the development stages. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but as you guys know, and we've heard multiple times, control correspondence, product development meetings, and also other sort of aspects you can engage through us to get that sort of feedback about your application. Once you submit your application, you're going to get your DRLs, you're going to get information requests. This is going to give you better information right now, what you need to do in the cycle to get to there. If it goes to a complete response letter, you still have the opportunity to have a complete post-CRL meeting to get additional clarity. If you need the clarity, use these opportunities to get that at those multiple stages, increase that sort of submissions quality. The other one is what we're doing here today. It's using the opportunities of these workshops, of these sort of other sort of opportunities to engage with FDA and learn. All these are recorded, they're online. As you heard from SBIA, they're collating those. We've also created a website that collates these into an aspect, so you can then go back and learn from all these previous sort of aspects, ensure that we're addressing all those issues. So in addition to the SBIA, we also have a Center for Research on Complex Generics. They go in more detail, I think, about specific scientific components, engaging both academia and generic industry. All this sort of information is preserved on the websites that can easily be accessed and tailored. And the last one is obviously our product-specific guidance program and our general guidance program. These are really just to be tools for you to be able to understand what the expectations and our current thinking are, and then to engage. Those are just recommendations. If you have other alternatives or proposals or different sort of thinking, use those communications such as CCs, control correspondence, or product development meetings to engage with us and talk about those alternatives. So this slide, again, has a lot of information, but what I want to do is give it that sort of snapshot. This snapshot is an example of the historic sort of information of enhanced communication and publicly available information just specific to those two studies that we mentioned for the topical dermatological products, the Vitro release testing and the IVPT studies. We understand that as we started to recommend these characterization studies, they may be new to industry, and therefore there may be this aspect where we need that sort of enhanced communication, understanding, and sort of working back and forth about what we need clarity for. So in addition to those draft guidances that were specific about IVRT for dermatological products that were released in October 2022 and the Vitro permeation testing, you also see that there was a whole series of SBI presentations and webinars even before we started recommending these things, preparing industry with this background information. This included the very original in 2020, identifying what are challenges and promises of these IVRT and the IVPT studies. Following up to that, you see 2021, we're already recommending and having seminars and workshops on what are best practices. And then looking at like, okay, now we've got these guidance out there. How do you interpret these guidances? Is there questions on these guidances in 2022 and 2023? In addition to that, as I mentioned, the CRCG workshops are usually 2-day or more intensive sort of things. We can actually do things like a step-by-step illustration, more hands-on. So really trying to identify what these gaps are, not only that, but how you guys can potentially address those issues. So on those websites that we've mentioned, as at the end of the sort of tables about this new helpful guidance and resources, this all hopefully links back to these and gives you a bit more sort of depth of understanding. So in conclusion, I want to really highlight the fact that approximately 40% of our ANDAs that are submitted get approved by the second cycle. The rating 60% of the ANDAs, I think that's an aspect where industry and FDA need to identify what is it needs to be doing more clarity, as well as industry needs to take more on to ensure that you guys are submitting high quality submissions, that when you get your first CRL, those deficiencies are clear and that you fully address them. So that way we can improve that efficiency. Each additional cycle is additional resources, not only on industry's part, but it's resources that FDA needs to use to do that sort of thing. So I think everybody's interest is to reduce the number of cycles and get those products out to the American public in as timely as possible. I'll remind you that the big one, most persistent, manufacturing facility major deficiencies. We really rely on industry to make sure that your facilities are accurate and up to date and adequate. With respect to the other sort of things, identifying those gaps within the BE, drug product and bioequivalence, where additional clarity may be needed, and or questions, using those GDF avenues to enhance communication to make sure that you guys have that sort of information that you feel is needed. And last, I will remind us in terms of for the GDF 3 initiatives, we really have those enhanced communication applications and encourage you guys all to use those. If you find them beneficial, let us know, provide feedback to us through multiple avenues to know what are your priorities, what are the things that you guys need additional information and clarity on, so that way you can improve your submission quality. So I will also advocate for that, the GDF Science and Research Program does a lot of the proactive information in this, allows us to get ready from those applications come review. You can see what our research priorities are here, and as well as helps prepare our review divisions. So I will come back in a little bit for the question and answer period, but with this, I'll hand over to Dr. Kim.